Hello and a very warm welcome to yet another edition of What Works, What Doesn't and Why, Insights from Evaluation. So What Works is actually that event which flags off all the dissemination process of IED's evaluation. And the thought behind it is, of course, that we'd like to discuss our evaluations with ADB staff before we take it to our external audiences. So today we'll be discussing ADB results and performance 2019-2020. We have a lineup of very impressive panelists, but before I introduce you to them, let's just watch a short video which will set the context for today's discussion.
Every year, the Asian Development Bank's Independent Evaluation Department reviews the performance and results of the bank's operations in the past year and offers lessons and recommendations to guide ongoing and future projects.
The annual evaluation review is a flagship report of IED. This review summarizes the overall performance of the institution and delivery of results on the ground. In this review, we examine the initial early results of ADB's response to the pandemic. We look into the preparedness for delivering on SDGs. And so there are basically four key messages of the report. Number one, that the ADB's initial support for addressing COVID pandemic has been fast, but that the current events indicate continuing high risk. It is likely also that the recovery may be protracted. A second message of the report is that performance of sovereign operation has been declining for the past two consecutive periods, driven especially by declining effectiveness. This is an issue of high importance for the institution. We also note that the performance of non-sovereign operations continue to be low, although this performance has improved slightly. The institutional approaches and tools that ADB has developed to support SDG are robust, are strong, but that they need to be better operationalized and reflected at the country level and at the project level as well. We note in the report that the gaps in SDG financing and the gaps in data availability to monitor progress in the region have widened due to the pandemic. And therefore, we note that ADB has to intensify its partnership with UN agencies and other NDBs to close these gaps and make sure that the resources that are needed to deliver on SDG are there, and that the information to understand progress in the region is also available.
AER 2021 made two recommendations to improve ADB performance. First, ADB strengthened efforts to develop sector frameworks that improve sector guidance and clarify the links between sector work and the Strategy 2030 thematic operational plans. Second, ADB strengthened sector management to enhance knowledge sharing and cross-fertilization.
The independent evaluation emphasizes that delivering results is critical to ADB's existence. As ADB continues to deliver its COVID-19 crisis response, we hope that the 2021 Annual Evaluation Review contributes to this effort by highlighting lessons and making suggestions on how to enhance institutional performance and results. The rapid spread of COVID-19 in 2020, the largest pandemic in more than a century, has triggered severe public health and economic crises across the world. In response, the Asian Development Bank has focused its operations to address the crisis, supporting its member countries contain the spread of the disease and protect the vulnerable. But over this 1 year, the pandemic has placed the world on a standstill, leading to a delay in the progress or implementation of SDGs.
SDGs' holistic approach to development highlights interconnected nature of development issues. A shared global development agenda will be crucial for promoting long-term recovery from socio-economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic.
ADB is committed to using the SDGs as one of the international frameworks to guide recovery from COVID-19, as they provide an agreed and internationally shared development framework. Country ownership of the SDGs and partnerships are crucial.
Ownership of the SDGs varies across ADB member countries, which underscores need to raise awareness and incorporate SDGs at the country level. Sector and thematic groups are largely at the forefront of ADB SDG support in member countries.
There is broad recognition that public finance alone cannot meet the financing needs of the SDG, and that mobilizing finance from diverse sources, particularly the private sector, will be vital to achieve the SDGs.
A much greater effort is needed to mobilize public and private financing for achieving the SDGs. ADB is well positioned to help countries rebuild their frameworks for the SDGs, but these efforts, in addition to financial mobilization, will need to be accelerated to offset the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and help countries resume their long-term development goals.
The review recommends the following to ADB to support achievement of SDGs.
There's only 10 years left to achieve the SDGs by 2030, and that will require much greater commitment among development partners to help countries attain the SDGs. ADB must continue leveraging its existing partnerships with other development agencies to address the SDG data and financing gaps that are now bigger due to the pandemic, and the greatest priority should be on a green recovery and tackling climate change.
The pandemic shows us the wisdom of what is already inherent in the SDGs, that the challenges we face cannot be dealt with in isolation. Understanding how these vulnerabilities shape the impact of the pandemic in the countries and sub-regions in Asia and the Pacific is critical to designing programs and policies that ensure no one and no country is left behind.
Right, so that quite sets the context for today's discussion. And one quick announcement before I introduce you to the panelists. We'll have a dedicated question and answer session where Marvin will ask you for questions. There's a chat box. You may input your questions in the chat box. Today's panelists are DEC Chair, Executive Director Varatai, Director General South Asia Department Ramesh Subramaniam, and Director Results Management and Aid Effectiveness Division Lu Shen. And today's session, as he has done for the past 5 years, is going to be moderated by Marvin Taylor-Dortman, DG IED. Marvin, it's over to you now.
Thank you very much, Saleha. Thank you so much to our distinguished panelists. I think we have a great team to talk about the issues that this report brings to the attention of the institution, the board, and to all of us. This is, as Saleha has hinted, this is actually my last opportunity in chairing these events. I want to thank everyone, all of you, the audience in the bank, and the panelists for the way that you have all welcomed this initiative since we introduced the WWW event, what works, what doesn't, and why series of events. You have extremely well welcomed this initiative and has continuously motivated us to continue presenting to you new topics for our discussion and attention. So today we're talking about performance and results of the institution over the last year. And so this is a plan. We're going to be discussing in two parts. In the first part, we're going to be talking about performance specifically of the institution. And in the second part, we're going to be addressing the issues related to SDGs. And in between the two parts, we're going to listen to some voices from the front line, Some colleagues from the regional offices that will come in and give us their perspective. So that's the plan, and let us then talk about the first part, performance of the institution. There are two things that I would like to bring to the attention of the panelists. One is related to performance itself, and the other is linked to the fact that the institution continues to be organized sectorially. We have sector experts, but it is demanded through Strategy 2030 to deliver thematically. And so the combination of the two frameworks, sector and thematic framework, is fundamental for successfully deliver on Strategy 2030. And this is an issue that was discussed in this report and thoroughly discussed with the board members as well. So let us talk first about performance. And let me first call on Lou. Please, Lou, you have the overall picture of the institution. And so we heard about the declining performance of sovereign operations. The decline is small, but we call attention to it because we see that it's a trend that is happening over the last 2-3 years, 3-year rolling average. And we see that there is an issue linked to effectiveness. So the question to you, I have two questions to you. One is, why is this happening in your view? And what is the bank doing to address this issue? And I have a second question, the same thing for the rest of our panelists, with respect to the link between sector work and thematic work. What is the institution doing to improve this connection between these two types of frameworks? Lou, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Marvin, for inviting me to the panel. And we greatly appreciate the work that IED is doing to really hold us accountable in terms of managing our project performance. And what you note in the AER is very, very key. And we also echo this observation from SBD's perspective, especially my division, where we do the development effectiveness review on an annual basis, where we have also observed the decline in effectiveness, and the sectors being particularly impacted are infrastructure and public sector management. So I think this is well noted, and we're very aware. And I just wanted to start by saying that, in terms of our work as a development institution, the nature of our business is inherently challenging, right? And so there's a wide range of factors that affect the effectiveness of the projects. Some we cannot control, things like unexpected events or changes in the political level, which leads to a reprioritization, right, of what's important for the country. And this could lead to changes in our programs and projects. And not to mention that when we're looking at the effectiveness of completed operations, there is a bit of a time lag that has happened, right, by the time that the projects are fully implemented and evaluated. And so there are certainly things that we can control as well. Right. There are things like capacity building on deficient areas, or technical issues like procurement or cost overruns. As some of you may know, I joined SBD, but I've spent a lot of time in operations. And so in my view, there are 3 areas that we're working on in terms of improving operational performance. The first point is really about goal setting, right? At the project level, when you're looking at effectiveness, it's how well you deliver against outputs and outcomes. And so one of the key challenges to effectiveness has been a tendency in the past to set ambitious or unrealistic targets, right? At the same time, there's a lack of data to prove successful outcome or achievements. So this is one area that we are very, very conscious of, and we have been working with operational departments to strengthen our capacity as an institution to come up with, especially with our DMFs, to come up with articulated and robust achievable project objectives, as well as appropriate targets and indicators. And this is really a joint effort between SVD, where we actually help the project teams in identifying and also formulating the DMF, operational departments, as well as operational departments with the DMCs. So in terms of understanding what are the important aspects of goal setting, and what are the appropriate levels of outcome indicators and how to measure them. So these are the type of things that we're doing, like providing training, learning, and other capacity building, not only at our end, but also through our project officers to the DMCs. I think that you will see as time passes, because this is, as I was saying, there's a bit of a time lag between when the projects are formulated and when they're implemented. You will see that the quality of the DMFs have been improved, and then the effort for data collection will definitely bear fruit. So that's the first point. The second point is about process, right? When you have a nice goal setting in place, the devil's in the details. And so when you're actually doing the implementation, we all know that sometimes we have changes in project officers, we have changes in counterparts. And so how do we actually have that consistency in the delivery of a project? And so we think that the systems in this place is very, very important. In the past, we have invested in tools to strengthen project monitoring. And in 2019, if you look at our project performance rating methodology, we have added a lot of indicators, right? Flagging issues before they become too late to address. This goes all the way from output delivery to compliance with safeguards, as well as financial management covenants. So the system, it's really proving effective in prompting the project teams to say, okay, what are the things that are falling behind? How can we actually address the issues as they come up? Of course, this is a work in progress, and so we're constantly in an improvement mode, and I think we can do more to help the project teams to better address these issues as they're doing the implementation. And last issue regarding effectiveness is really the engagement, right? So a lot of the institutional reforms that we have are really gearing us towards working with our resident missions and DMCs. For example, the resident mission reform aims to improve the quality of ADB's engagement to the DMCs and creating a more agile organization in the field and facilitate knowledge transfer and communications. The organizational review, as you rightly pointed out, it's really aligning or looking at aligning what we're doing versus what Strategy 2030's priorities are. And just quickly to address your issue about the sector operations and the thematic priorities. As you know, this is really, really quite important for us. And SDCC has been doing a lot of work on the sector level to create the sector frameworks, right? And we have been developing this for education, for finance, for health, for transport, and water, which will be aligned with Strategy 2030. And not only this, but the revision of the energy policy is another good example of a key effort that we're doing in terms of aligning with Strategy 2030 objectives. And it's being developed with a very active board and stakeholder participation. So we will continue to review and strengthen our approaches to reflect the regional changes in the development context. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very clear, very clear. We'll come back to that. Let me bring in Ramesh. Ramesh, you lead the operations of the bank in Southeast Asia, and we are reporting in this work that performance in Southeast Asia actually improved and continues to improve in this the examine period. Are there any lessons that can be applied to the rest of the organization? We speak in the report of performance in Cambodia and Vietnam as being the drivers of what happened in Southeast Asia, but perhaps there are more generic lessons that you could share. And on sectors, do you actually need sector frameworks to improve the work in your own region?
Great. Thank you so much, Marvin, first of all, for this opportunity. It's always fun to join you in the WWW series. I was just the only thing I was thinking, it would have been nice if we had met in headquarters in auditorium A or B. One of those would have been really nice. The report that you finalized, and also the video that captured, really very helpful in terms of the pointers that you're coming up with. And Lou gave a very good overview in terms of the framework and how we are operating, in terms of the entire project cycle. I'm going to take first the sector framework question, Marvin, first, and then go into what have we done, what have we learned in Southeast Asia. I'll also mention some pointers from the Pacific region, because Pacific also has done quite well in this reporting period. First, on the sector frameworks, we believe it's actually quite important. Now, it is also required, the ones that have come out, we've been using them. In fact, in the Strategy 2030 context, in Southeast Asia, we started the system, I think it was in late 2018, of every project tracking in terms of what would be the high-level pathways as to how a particular project will contribute to the Strategy 2030 priorities. And then particularly for policy-based operations, looking at blocks of policy actions to see how they'll have an impact, so that we have the full results chain being Strategy 2030 priorities being reflected in the results chain. Now, in fact, even dating back, particularly since for the period 2018 to 2020, we are looking at operations that have been underway for 7-8 years prior to that. In Southeast Asia, even in the beginning of 2010, 2011, we had introduced a framework called ASR. These are sector assessments, strategies, and roadmaps. These ASRs were prepared along with the country partnership strategies for every country in every sector that we operate in Southeast Asia. The ASR then sets makes we undertake an overall assessment. We go into each sector, subsector, look at the overall policy, institutional, legal, regulatory environments. We look at capacity issues. We look at, essentially, it's distilling what needs to be done, what are the key priorities, and what should be ADB's roadmap. So that's where the roadmap part of it comes. One part of it, which has been quite critical in Southeast Asia, it's been a lot of lessons learned over the last about 10 years, I would say, is also understanding the social and environmental safeguards requirements and the institutional arrangements. Because you have, in Southeast Asia, as you know, you have a full spectrum. You've got upper middle income countries like Thailand, and emerging upper middle income countries like Indonesia, Philippines. Then you've got Cambodia, then you have Myanmar and Laos, PDR, for example, and more recently, we have Timor-Leste, which has joined the group. So in that regard, deriving from the ASR experience, we believe that the sector frameworks will play a critical role. And the ones that have come out, as I mentioned, they've been quite helpful. And particularly since you mentioned, Marvin, the case of Vietnam and Cambodia, these are two countries among all the countries in Southeast Asia where we have done extensive ASR exercises in both of these countries. Now, let me mention a few points in terms of what have we done, or what we have been trying to do in improving the project and portfolio performance. Here, our approach has been to create what we would characterize as a virtuous cycle comprising three things. And I think there are, while we've done somewhat better in this period, we also learn a lot from our colleagues in South Asia, in Central and West Asia, as well as East Asia. So there are common elements other departments have been adopting as well. The first part of this virtuous cycle is focusing on project design. Is having better project design as well as better readiness, improving project readiness continuously. It's a challenging exercise because you need significant resources. Not all countries have capacity. You need to invest in capacity. You need to assist them, support them, work with them. We have had a project readiness trust fund in Southeast Asia, which has been actually quite helpful in improving the design quality as well as making projects more ready The PRF has been particularly useful for the Greater Mekong sub-region countries. In Indonesia, we had a separate program called Sustainable Infrastructure Assistance Program with dedicated support from Australia, which has been quite useful in making projects more ready as they come into the stream. The second part of the virtuous cycle is placing strong emphasis on action-oriented project and portfolio monitoring. We introduced a system, in fact, this is borrowing from the system that Central and West Asia had in the 2007-2008 period, called PMAPS, Portfolio Management Action Plan System. We've had monthly monitoring at the head of department level of all projects. We had it for 2 years at the beginning. Now we are doing it on a quarterly basis. Now what this has achieved is to motivate the teams that are working. This is a lot of grinding work when it comes to project implementation, because average length of project implementation is 6.5 years. Many projects do take longer. And these PMAPs, the action plans, have been very helpful in identifying issues and taking concrete actions. And that's certainly been showing up or has showed up in the results that you are capturing in the report. And the third part of the virtuous cycle is basically closing the loop. It is learning lessons from the projects and feeding these back into project design. A key part of this is also working with our staff, and we are seeing certainly improvement in the quality of the program and project completion reports. Obviously, as a precursor to that, you need to more accurately capture what has happened in projects. So it's evaluating performance and documenting lessons. And this is something we are very happy, you yourselves in IED have recognized. But this is something we also learned from the validation that IED does. And that kind of feeds back into the work that we do. Let me also share a few points from our Pacific colleagues. They've had, in fact, again, for this period, they had in 2011, 2012, they had a system called the Pacific Project Improvement Action Plan approach, and recognizing the capacity challenges in FCAS countries, they had a dedicated regional regional technical assistance to support project implementation. So this has been very, very helpful as an early starter for them. And in line with Strategy 2030, there is a POD has adopted a differentiated approach for SIDS and FCAS countries, and which particularly includes measures at every part of the project cycle to improve overall effectiveness and sustainability. The Project Readiness Fund particularly has been very, very helpful in Pacific. In fact, we are in Southeast Asia. We are looking at how Pacific has been successful in using the PRF, because we've had challenges in many countries because of legal and regulatory issues involved in going for 2 layers of approval. And also a couple of specific points that we think are quite noteworthy in the Pacific case is putting emphasis on operation and maintenance. It's not just project implementation, but operation and maintenance, and focusing on asset management also is very critical. You need to focus on these during project preparation and implementation, and subsequently after the projects, the assets are handed over, making sure that we build capacity of the executing and the implementing agencies along the way, which obviously will be playing a key role in boosting sustainability. Let me pause there, Marvin. If there is time, I'll be happy to respond. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Very, very comprehensive, and I appreciate that you brought to us the perspective from the Pacific, where we have seen, fortunately, an improvement in the trend of performance trend. Still at low levels, is a risky environment, but the good news is that the trend is positive, and we appreciate that you illuminated us with what that region part is doing to improve the performance. Let us now bring the perspective of the board from ED Warutai. Obviously, he's speaking on his own behalf as a board member, not for the board as a whole. And ED Warutai, you're also the chair of a deck, so you have a good understanding of how the bank is performing and what results is delivering. What do you think about the recent performance of the institution? Expectations that you as a board member have on what the bank should do to continuously improve its performance, and your views about the articulation between the sector work and the thematic work expected by Strategy 2030.
Thank you very much, Marvin, and thanks also for inviting me to participate in this very important event on what works, what doesn't work, and why. So interesting to hear, views from the SPD and DG Ramesh as well. So let me just cover a few points on your questions. For the 2021 annual evaluation review, definitely it identified that the sovereign operations performance has been declining, for the past 2 consecutive 3-year period. Despite this, the long-term trend continues to be positive. So there are some reasons behind this. On the other hand, the performance of non-sovereign operations, although remain low, has improved slightly, mainly driven by the enhanced ADB work qualities. But partly it's a legacy problem. It's a legacy issue, as we discussed at the DEC meeting in April later on. In terms of effectiveness, as I see it, it is to what extent that the ADB operations have met the expected outcome and outputs. So I believe IED has its sophisticated tools in place to measure such effectiveness. I also took note that the effectiveness of ADB projects has been on the downward trend since 2014 to 2016. Performance was affected by a number of factors, including underestimation of project costs at appraisal, overly ambitious objectives, design issues, poor performance of consultants and contractors, inadequate safeguard management, weak implementation capacities, perhaps also at the country level. So absorptive capacity at the country levels. So these factors impeded the effectiveness. But we need to be mindful, that last year was an extraordinary year. So also true for this year. So a project implementation was facing so many challenges. It definitely affected our operational effectiveness. Be having staff working from home, inability to work in the field. So, and as rightly pointed out by the first interim RTE note, you have rightly pointed it out that we have a concern on staff heavy workloads and the work-life balance of staff. So, what can we do about it? So, taking into account of those factors, I think several important measures which are essence could be taken to enhance the performance of the bank, such as first, to improve the project quality at entry and project readiness, as mentioned by Lou and Ramesh. Second, to develop an alternative or contingency plan at the stage of project design or early implementation, and take the mid-course corrective measures if the project is off track. Third, to further strengthen project monitoring and evaluation, including project teams, regular progress review, including through the appropriate use of third-party resources and technologies. And fourthly, to enhance the capacity of executing agencies and implementing agencies by regular and targeted trainings and capacity building provided to them. So with regard to the articulation of the sector and thematic work of the bank, we can hear from the outside point of view that the organizational structure of the bank encourages silo work, silo type of work, as it focuses on regional and sectoral. So, however, I'm quite positive that several ongoing initiatives by the bank, such as the One ADB approach, the Knowledge Management Action Plan, the Culture Transformation Initiative, the TA Review, and also Resident Mission Review. So these will help break down the silo, and in turn, it will encourage strong frameworks and improve collaboration and effectiveness of the work at the banks, and very important to help deliver the goals of the bank. Going forward, the bank should also look into developing its own in-house expertise to strengthen the complementarity between sector and thematic, rather than relying on external consultant for a quick win solution. Besides those initiatives, another important aspect is to reinforce the linkages between sectoral and thematic priorities. The 2021 AER has identified some recommendations of enhancing cross-fertilizations, collaboration between the two areas. Furthermore, the bank should develop strong frameworks that provide clarity on the links between sector operation and thematic operation plans and address any gaps. They should provide detailed and clear guidance on the selection and scope of program and projects, including how sector operation would contribute to the achievement of the expected results across Strategy 2030's operational priorities. In addition, I welcome the use of peer review process. This would ensure that the in-depth technical guidance is provided to operations departments, and that relevant best practices and knowledge across sectors are incorporated in project and program designs intended to effectively meet the Strategy 2030 priorities. Let me conclude with sharing with you the deck, deliberation on the AER. I remember in April 12, when we discussed this AER, the deck requested more regular engagement and updates from management, especially, for example, in the form of IBB, to keep the board updated on the activities and achievements of sector and thematic groups going forward. So we would like to see more, on how bank's operation can integrate sector works into the thematic works. So these two can go, hand in hand, I believe. So, and the board will continue to closely monitor the performance drivers and patterns going forward. Let me stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very clear expectations and suggestions from you as a chair of a DEC. Appreciate that you brought this summary conclusions of DEC. There is an interesting question it says to Ramesh, but is to everyone. But I would like to see if we can park this and see if we can come back to it. But I want to acknowledge the point that that our colleague is asking about, that beyond compliance. Our colleague is saying beyond compliance. In other words, our colleague is reading that what had been said, that is being done is mostly on the compliance side. Beyond that, is there any are there any efforts to encourage staff to collect information on actual results on the ground to improve the performance of the institution? I'll park this, and I would like to go to the second part of our conversation, because our time is running very fast, and so that we can say something about the very important challenges that we're facing with respect to SDGs. Voices from the front line.
I agree with the recommendations of IED and how they would help us achieve SDG targets. If I can talk about the recommendation of ramping up partnerships with other development organizations, I can give you Pakistan's example. We have a very strong collaboration with all the key development partners, and we hold bi-monthly meetings to discuss our programs and what we are doing and how we can support or complement each other towards achieving SDGs. This started after COVID-19, when we all realized that there is no room to waste resources, and hence it's important to have a very, very strong collaboration. But our discussion and focus is not just on our COVID-19 related efforts, but also broader programs and how we can go towards, and the country can go towards achieving SDG targets.
The IDE report highlights the importance of working with partners to collect data to monitor the SDGs, because the availability of data has been worsened by the COVID-19 outbreak. We face this situation in the Pacific too. A lack of available data is a major impediment in monitoring SDG progress, but also in us developing programs that directly respond to SDG-related development challenges. In response to this, we are working with national statistics offices in several of ADB's smaller Pacific Island countries, including Niue and including Tuvalu, to improve their data collection, their data management, and their data monitoring so that we can better track SDG progress.
Excellent views from the field, from the front line, our colleagues that are there dealing directly with beneficiaries of the engagement of by the bank. And this is a good introduction to our second part of the conversation. There are more questions that are being posed there, and we'll come back to them, hopefully, if we are short in the answer to the questions that we have for this second part. And let me go right away to Lou. What we're saying in the report is that ADB has a good framework. The tools are there to follow up on SDGs, but a better application of these tools for delivering results on the ground is needed. Well, what is the institution doing? What is ADB doing to improve the application of these tools? And what challenges do you see for achieving the SDGs in the context of COVID-19? We cannot not recognize that we are in a crisis, but we still have long-term objectives. Very short to see if we could cover everyone. Thank you very much. Lou.
Thank you, Marvin. You asked very tough questions, and you only give us a very limited amount of time to respond, so I will try to be very concise. So first, I want to echo the findings from IED in the 2021 AER. I think, as you noted in the AER, the COVID pandemic has driven home the relevance of the SDGs, but also the need to enhance our collective effort, right, to achieve the aspirations that were set out in the 17 goals. And the other thing that I really do echo is really the 3 points that were raised, right? The challenges that face us in the 3 areas: awareness and operationalization, the localization at the DMC level, both at the national and the subnational region, as well as the partnerships. So before I delve into these 3 things, I just wanted to note and also echo IED's finding that ADB is really in the forefront, right, in this agenda. And we were the first to establish systems for linking our projects to the SDGs, as well as our corporate results framework is fully aligned with the SDGs. And so I think this is really looking at us as a pioneer in this field. We have also led efforts in terms of aligning with other MDGs, and we have actually, end of 2020, we have jointly produced the MDB report on the contributions towards the SDGs with, I think, with in partnership with the Islamic Development Bank, but also the heads of the 12 MDBs as well as IMF. So onto the three issues. One, the awareness. I think part of this is really getting the institution more engaged and also understanding how SDGs are actually aligned with what we do as an institution. So to this extent, I think communication's extremely key in terms of really getting everybody engaged and also talking about SDGs as part of our work, right? And so in March of this year, we had our first publication of ADB support for the SDGs, where we really linked up how Strategy 2030 defines our institutional approach to the SDGs, right? And then in April, we also launched the SDG dialogues, where we really invited very senior ADB staff or management together with global leaders in this area to reflect on what we're doing and how we can actually deepen our approach as an institution towards SDGs. So I think that awareness is a very, very important aspect of what we do. We have to let our people know why they should care about SDGs and how this is related to our work. There's also the part about incorporating this into our operations. And we really appreciate and we are fully aware the need to continue to strengthen the operational practices on the ground. And this is, I think this is something that takes time, but we are also using systems in this place to really kind of get people to think about their projects in terms of SDGs. So SDG tagging in our system is a very good step, and that has been ongoing since 2019, and we're continuously trying to improve this based on the 2 years of implementation as well as IED's feedback. In terms of really incorporating this into the country level, we are working with our regional departments on strengthening the country partnership strategies, the CPS, where in their results frameworks really make that linkage, right, to the SDG priorities as articulated by our DMCs. So I think these are really, really important first steps to take. On the localization, we are supporting SDG champions for implementation at the government level. So for example, ADB is supporting cities such as Jakarta, who are committed to do a voluntary local review of their progress towards SDGs. And I think this is a very, very important and key issue that we should actually support. And we're also assessing opportunities to embed SDGs in subnational planning and financing frameworks, which I will come back later at the end. On the last part of our partnerships, we have been in partnership with the UN as well as other IFIs, as I had mentioned in the beginning. But in 2015, we established a new partnership with UN SCAP as well as UNDP to really invest in the knowledge, data and policy dialogue to support the progress towards the SDGs in the Asia Pacific. And this is something that we're continuously doing. With MDG Working Group, we are managing the Management for Development Results, MFDR, yes. ADB has really led the effort to develop a common approach to the SDGs. And so this is something that we're continuously doing. And just to kind of cap everything together, one of the things that we have actually just recently approved is a corporate TA that looks at all of these areas, right? The TA will be looking at how SBD, along with the sector and thematic groups, as well as operational departments, can actually deepen their support for SDGs. This is really a TA that will support awareness raising, finding champions, as well as mobilize finance. And to what end? It's really to deliver on the SDGs, but at the same time to address the data gaps that was actually mentioned by our colleagues in Pacific. In the data side, this is something that we have been working very closely on with ERCD to get them involved in a range of efforts to strengthen National Statistical Office and capacity and their capacity to deliver on the data needs of the SDG agenda. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Quite comprehensive as well. Ramesh, briefly, you heard Lou, right, from the corporate point of view, but you are on the ground. You're dealing with the beneficiaries directly. In your own region, what are the key challenges to achieve the SDGs that you see? And how does that look to you? What, from the corporate point of view, you heard us applied from the purely operational point of view? Does the bank have to do more from the purely operational point of view?
Thank you, Marvin. Before I go into some details, I wanted to particularly appreciate IED for taking this topic up, because coming from you from an independent perspective, this is very, very critical. It enables us to, this AER will enable us to go to our TMCs, share the knowledge that you have put together. And I'm also happy that in parallel, the SDCC SDG report a few months back and ERCD's key indicators special chapter, all of them are actually nicely coming together. And in SERD, we've been focusing quite a bit on knowledge as well. I think, you know, what you have captured in the report, what IED colleagues shared in the video, as well as in the key indicators, the numbers are quite worrisome. You take any goal, in fact, even before the pandemic, in Southeast Asia, but as well as across the Asia and Pacific, there were significant gaps in, or the length of the road to SDGs was kind of getting longer and longer. Now, clearly, the pandemic has made it much worse, and in Southeast Asia, particularly so. The numbers, you know, that we see in your report, the 75 to 80 million people falling into extreme poverty. In fact, at the height of the pandemic last year, we did a quick survey in terms of informal sector unemployment in Southeast Asia, taking two countries, Philippines, Thailand, and actually Indonesia. We also had some data. At that time, there was concern that there could be as high as about 17 to 18 million people not being able to get back into the employment they had prior to the pandemic, given the sectors that have been devastated. So clearly, the challenges are quite significant. Now, moving forward, fiscal consolidation is a question of when. It's not a question of if. We are seeing revenue compression. Now, clearly, countries need to take steps, and there is recognition that they cannot pull out of the stimulus too soon, because that could be damaging. But at the same time, there is recognition that there will be a phase of consolidation that will be setting in, and clearly there would be competing priorities. And in that regard, I think what we are seeing now is much more worrisome than what we saw in the last 5 years of the MDG battle that we had. In fact, you know, at that time, there was no crisis, or at least it was well after the Asian financial crisis for Southeast Asia. But still, there were a lot of coordination issues. Now here, in addition to the challenges that we may face in countries with regard to capacity and so on, you've got considerable resource challenges from the public sector. So clearly, what needs to be done in terms of public and private sectors working together in mobilizing financing for sustainable development goals is going to be so critical. I'll just mention two areas, Marvin, in terms of what we are focusing on in Southeast Asia. They are in the social sectors. Health, obviously, you know, that is a focus area. Now here, a particular concern that had been emerging even prior to the pandemic was that the non-communicable diseases were not getting enough attention. In many countries, we were focusing on communicable diseases, but NCD was a problem. Now, particularly in the pandemic phase, now the pandemic becoming longer, the NCD battle is certainly going to be an issue. Significant resources have been devoted to fight the pandemic. Now, how do we help countries in terms of getting back in terms of overall equity within the health sector? That is a focus area for us across the region in every country that we are providing support. In Philippines, for example, the universal healthcare program that we are supporting, quite comprehensive, that is to create an overall enabling framework, as well as to make sure that there are resources in place. Because countries need to evolve their own financing mechanisms based on the country context. In the case of Philippines, for example, they have gone for mobilizing resources through the so-called sin taxes on things like alcohol, tobacco, sugary drinks, and so on, which is expected to mobilize significant amount of resources for particularly focusing on health-related in increasing health cover and thereby meeting the sustainable development goals. So this is a major area for us. In other countries, in Indonesia, likewise, we are focusing on the health sector as well as in education, in terms of making sure that there are resources provided for meeting future requirements that will be emerging after the pandemic is over. In smaller countries, in Cambodia and Laos PDR, in the health sector support that we provided in the overall One Health concept in GMS in the Greater Mekong sub-region for promoting health security, these priorities that I mentioned would be figuring quite prominently in our work. They have been important, and more so. And they're particularly working with upper middle income countries like Thailand, which have better systems in place, are quite important. Now, the second area, climate and green financing, going to be very critical. And here, Marvin, it's again creating the enabling environment as well as putting in place financing frameworks. Promoting projects that are bankable is going to be critical. Two things: the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility, for which we have received significant support, including from the GCF, the Green Climate Fund, the first programmatic approval. And the second is something that we are working on early stages, is facilitating energy transition in the region, paving way for helping countries to reach their net zero ambition. Let me pause there, Morgan.
Thank you very much, Ramesh. Let us hear from Iri Warotai. Again, board perspective, concerns about the region achieving the SDGs. What should the bank do better to support the country, especially as our colleagues are saying in their questions, especially in this context that we're going through of conflict, crisis. Iri Warotai, please.
Of course, there are concerns on the regional's ability to achieve the SDGs by 2030. This is mainly because of the COVID pandemic and the challenges imposed by the COVID pandemic. There are several huge challenges, including fiscal pressures, debt distress, loss of livelihoods, looming higher poverty. Unfortunately, those that are severely hit are developing countries, mostly in the Asia and the Pacific region. Some member countries are still battling with the third and fourth wave of the pandemic due to the predominant strain, which is more infectious and spread even rapidly. Like DG Ramesh mentioned, that we took note also, of the latest edition of ADB's key indicator for Asia and the Pacific 2021 that was released a couple of days ago. 80 million of people in developing Asia and the Pacific were pushed back into extreme poverty. So compared to what would happen without the COVID-19, this is a serious issue. And good news, the report by ADB on support for sustainable development goals, which is published in March 21 this year, has suggested that the overall countries in Asia and the Pacific have made more progress on SDGs since 2015 than other global regions. And also, how the bank can support the DMCs in their effort to achieve SDGs. So this is, what we have been thinking about a lot. So since we are kind of losing track, many countries are facing new priorities. They are facing with the pandemic and would like to recover from it rapidly. They might lose track of the long-term goals of achieving SDGs. But we should be mindful that the importance of achieving the SDGs is that crucial. So I would like to provide some points. First, the bank needs to be innovative and agile in the way it works with this COVID-19 virus that is going to be with us for quite some time. So the bank should review its approach on how best to support DMCs to ensure that it will be more resilient, coping with the future outbreak, and thus preventing reversal of the progress towards SDG goals. I'm, an advocate of the differentiated approach. So each DMCs are facing different, uniqueness. They have different preconditions and facing different problems. So in the way that the bank would like to assist them, need to be more focused going forward to address the question raised by some of the audience. And this will be discussed at the BMR, the Board and Management Retreat, which is going to be held in early September. So this is one of the major topics that the board and management will get together and discuss, going forward, how ADB would address the need of the DMCs, in terms of rapidly recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. And second, I think we should deepen the engagement at the country and subnational levels. So most of our work at the national level. We are trying to go deeper into subnational levels. So in the developing member countries, this is for the achievement of the implementation of the SDGs. And at the same time, we need to create a sense of ownership and the buy-in from member countries to commit on the delivery of the SDG goals. In dealing with the impacts of COVID-19, the countries might have deviated from their emphasis on SDGs. But one thing that I'm pleased to share is that I can see that there is a major change in the way the CPS is being conducted. So a good example is PRC and Thailand CPS. So those recent CPS, we are trying to incorporate SDG into the CPS. So for example, for PRC, the CPS focuses on environmentally sustainable development, climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. For Thailand CPS, it focuses on sustainable development and to reduce greenhouse gas, for example. So this is a good sign that we are trying to incorporate those SDG goals into the CPS. And I believe measures are being taken to better reflect the SDGs into CPS, including the CPS results framework. Let me move on to how are we going to strengthen the partnership with other MDBs, including UN agencies. So in supporting the governments on their implementation of the SDG, as this is a joint effort. However, I think there should be a clear distinction of division of labor between these agencies, in order to avoid duplication and prevent waste resources. So ADB should, bring in the programs that we can add the most value, and we are at the comparative advantage, and leave others, operations to the other agencies. And ADB should look at, that's the thing that we are doing. And I think it's going to be very beneficial to the DMCs in order to recover sustainably from the crisis, which is the DRM. So the domestic resource mobilizations. This is another resource that we need the DMCs to build up on their own capacities. And I think DG mentioned one of the very, a good initiative that ADB is helping, on the area of capital market development, especially in the area of green financing, green bonds, sustainability bonds. Thailand has issued, a couple of green bonds and sustainability bonds with the assistance of the ADB, and this is quite commendable. And going forward, we at the board, we would like to see more of this exercise being applied to other DMCs as well. So lesson can be learned from very successful, stories of the other DMCs. And I think my last point is perhaps on the knowledge dissemination. This is to create more awareness on the 2030 agenda. Various lessons learned must be disseminated internally and externally through the resident mission. I think resident mission is at the forefront of ADB's operations. So they are closer to the client. The way they interact to the respective governments, it's very important. So ADB is at a good position to support this initiative. And also, last point, I also believe that the board has a major role to play. We are coming from diverse background and experiences. The board can provide advice and guidance, and also ensuring that the implementation of the projects are always aligned towards the SDG goals. I would just stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iri Warotai. Quite comprehensive once again. Colleagues, unfortunately, we have come to the end of the time we have allocated to this. I think it has been a fantastically rich exchange with our panelists. On the topic of performance, we heard basically that the formula is the usual one: better design, better monitoring, follow-up, better implementation, engagement, closing the loop, learning from past operations. I think that was common in everyone. On sector frameworks, I think there's a agreement on all the panelists that sector frameworks are important, and there is a strong direction of management working in this respect. Strong expectations of from Iri Warotai from the board that this is strengthened, this relationship between sector and thematic work. We heard finally on SDG that the bank has not lost the perspective nor the expectations on the long term. We are living a crisis, and I think everyone, I'm sure, will agree with me that it was refreshing to hear our three panelists clearly talking about the long-term perspective and not losing sight of it despite the gravity of the crisis that the world and our region is going through. That, to me, was absolutely refreshing. That also, I think, it corresponds very nicely with the intention of IED of bringing this topic to the attention of the institution. The world does not end with COVID-19. We continue moving on, and there are long-term goals that this institution has set itself to contribute to the achievement of SDGs in the region. We thank you all for your attention. Our panelists have been answering the questions and they are being posted for the attention of everyone, for the view of everyone. We thank them for that. We thank our panelists so very, very much for their engagement and the very, very thorough and great responses to the questions that we posed to them. Let's celebrate their contribution with a big round of applause. Thank you so very much, Iri Warotai, Lou, Ramesh, for your contributions. And thank you very much to our team, Saleha, Karina, Twinkle, and the entire team that has organized this event. Thank you so much, and thank you mostly to all of you who participated in the event. Thank you so much.